Welcome to the EQ Fit podcast. Our mission is to equip people to prosper in every aspect of their life. Whether you're at home or in the workplace, we explore practical ways of improving success, satisfaction, finding balance, and building enjoyable and beneficial relationships. Thank you for joining us. Today I want to give you an update on an assessment tool that I've been using for about a year now. In my consulting and coaching practice, the habit story assessment has become a critical tool for helping individuals understand and reshape the habits that's driving their behavior. As much as 43% of our daily actions are habitually driven. Basically, that means without thought or consideration. Habits play a fundamental role in determining our personal and our professional success. And the habit story assessment and the model provides a clear framework for recognizing and modifying these patterns, these things that we call habits, by focusing on the process of habit formation and then reinforcement through the lens of what we call the 4 aspects of habit formation, which is cue, predict, act, and reinforce. That's a cycle. And that's how habits get formed, and it's how they either get reinforced or they get extinguished. We either reinforce them because they're giving us a reward that we want, or we're trying to get rid of those. Now, the habit story assessment sheds light on both productive and counterproductive habits, on the emotional state of an individual, and on the response patterns. So let me start with a story, which I always like to do. And this is kind of a combination of experiences and stories over the past year. And again, as I said, it's an update on the habit story assessment that I have integrated into my work with clients. So it was 1 year ago, almost exactly 1 year ago, that I went through the extensive certification process to be able to use this assessment. Since that time, I've used this assessment in a variety of different ways. First, it's proven to be highly predictive of success in a hiring process. So think of pre-hire assessments. This has become a staple of the pre-hire assessment package that I use in helping companies get the right fit when they're in a hiring process. Number 2, coaching clients have found it to be surprisingly accurate in describing the challenges they're having and then helping them to define a good path forward so that they can enhance their success. Number 3, in training and development situations, it provides insight far beyond any other assessments that I'm using. And I am certified in many different categories and types of assessments. So that's saying a lot when you say this one assessment just stands head and shoulders above everything else. Number 4, it is proven to provide critical insight into situations where I have been asked to come in and do an intervention, and that could be with a team or it could be with a leader, when there are some underlying issues and behaviors or lack of performance that needs to turn around. And the last one I'll talk about, it is one of the only assessment tools that clearly identifies the sources or the root cause of decision-making and behavior that are holding people back and negatively impacting their performance. That says a lot, doesn't it? The habit story assessment has become foundational for me as a tool in the work that I do with people. Now, let me give you a few examples, actual practical examples of where I've used it. In a recent situation between business partners, it has identified counterproductive habits that have created conflict. This has led to deep work to resolve these issues. Here's another example. For a leadership team I've been working with, it has provided insight that they will be using throughout their organization to enhance their employee development. Here's another one. For a business owner, it has identified long-term counterproductive habits that have been holding the owner back and limiting their effectiveness. And here's another one to share with you. For a few individuals that I'm working with that are interested in their personal development, it has connected the dots for them between their habits and their emotional environment and the emotional load that they are carrying. It has brought to light the best way to reduce stress and have a more successful and satisfactory life. I can say that in all of my years of experience, the habit story assessment is the single most impactful assessment that I have ever used. Why? Because we can now clearly measure and understand our habits, and we can understand the impact those habits are having on every aspect of our lives. That is insight beyond what you're going to get from any other single assessment. So let's spend some time exploring the habit story assessment and the underlying science and the underlying model so we can really start to get a grasp of why it is so effective and can have such a profound impact on people. Well, at the heart of the habit story model lies a very simple but profound cycle. Here's where it starts. It starts with a cue. So I want you to think a triggering emotion like hope or fear or care. So there's a triggering emotion, the emotion or the environmental trigger that initiates that habitual response. Then it moves to predict the individual's anticipation of the outcome of the habit, whether they believe it will be satisfactory and it will take care of a need or an emotional state that they're having. Then it moves to the third step in the cycle, which is act, the behavior performed in response to the cue and the prediction. And then the fourth and final part of this cycle, and it is a cycle, it keeps going, is reinforce or extinguish. This is the feedback loop that either strengthens the habit or begins the process of breaking it down, depending on the result. This is a simple but powerful cycle if we can really understand what it does for us. So this cycle really gives us a window into how deeply ingrained habits influence our actions, often without our conscious awareness of that. By mapping out this process through the habit story assessment, my clients can identify the root cause of many of their automatic behaviors, especially those counterproductive ones that impede personal or professional growth. So let's now talk about the format of the assessment itself. And it starts with the first of three major areas of measure, and that is productive and counterproductive habits. The habit story assessment identifies positive or productive habits and negative or counterproductive habits. Productive habits are those that align with personal and organizational goals. They foster growth, success, and satisfaction. Counterproductive habits, on the other hand, work against these goals. They lead to stress, disengagement, or diminished or reduced performance. So, what is the impact of these? For productive habits, this includes behaviors like consistent follow through, proactive problem solving, and clear communication. When reinforced, they not only drive performance, but they also foster greater satisfaction and fulfillment. Clients who become aware of their productive habits often find themselves more empowered, motivated, and focused, knowing they are contributing to their success. Okay, let's look at the other side of the coin, so to speak. What about counterproductive habits? These include procrastination, avoidance of difficult conversations, or overreacting in stressful situations. Things like blame fixing or dismissing or denying. Those are all counterproductive habits that will hold people back. Such habits reinforce a cycle of stress and underperformance. So when clients can pinpoint these patterns, they are better equipped to disrupt them and create healthier and more productive and effective habits. So when we think about productive habits and counterproductive habits, if you want to enhance your performance, your goal attainment, your success, your satisfaction, your emotional state, your response patterns, if you want to enhance those things, the first thing you need to do is diminish the counterproductive habits. But how do you know what to do unless you have an assessment report like the Habit Story assessment that allows you to actually see the measures and which ones to focus on and what is the best pathway to reduce those counterproductive habits? This is why this has become such a powerful part of the work that I do with individuals, with leaders, with teams, and really with entire organizations. Okay, so the second part of the Habit Story assessment is what we call response patterns. Response patterns refer to the automatic behaviors or reactions that individuals demonstrate in response to specific triggers. These patterns are typically ingrained and can be difficult to recognize without a structured assessment like the Habit Story. Why is that important? Response patterns are particularly revealing in professional settings where quick decisions and interpersonal dynamics are constantly at play. For example, a leader who consistently responds with defensiveness when questioned may limit team collaboration or it might undermine trust. Now, if we can understand these patterns, it allows us to become better aware of unproductive or non-productive responses, giving us the tools to replace negative reactions with more constructive behaviors. And that's a mouthful. Basically, what we're saying is if we can see where the issues are, the things that are negatively impacting our behavior, our performance, then we have the ability to start to change those. But if we can't see those, how do you know where to start to change it? Where does the transformation even begin? So, if we want to create a focus for change, how do we do that? By identifying the specific responses to the emotional cues like stress, frustration, so many others, that the Habit Story assessment can provide concrete data that can be used to formulate a change plan. So when we think about the drivers of our habits, the major categories of emotions like hope and fear and care, when you think about those and understand, of course, there are nuances within those areas, but when we see those things, it's going to help us better understand when we look at a Habit Story assessment report if we're really strong in the productives in one of these areas, but the counterproductives are also very strong, they basically negate each other. You can't just focus on the productives without diminishing the counterproductives. And the more that we can understand the emotional triggers that drive these, we can put a plan in place to change that. Okay, the third thing we're measuring in the habit story assessment is emotional state. Emotions play a significant role in how habits are formed and how they're maintained. The habit story assessment measures emotional states, which helps individuals recognize where they are. So it's going to be things like emotional intensity. It's going to be a measure of drain. How much of your energy is getting drained because of the frustration or the stress or the anxiety that is a part of your emotional environment or your emotional state. So these measures in the overall category of emotional state are really critical to understanding where you are. And that includes a measure of emotional stability. I mean, the higher your emotional stability, the less likely you are to react in non-productive ways when you're triggered in some fashion. But if you have a lower emotional stability, and we're seeing a lot of people with lower scores in emotional stability, it's just going to be more difficult to navigate those emotions. The better we can navigate emotions, those of our own and those of people around us, the better we're able to deal with situations and use our higher thinking skills to come up with good problem-solving outcomes and strategic thinking and consequential thinking. But if we don't have a lot of emotional stability, and if we have a lot of drain in our lives, you can see how that's going to limit our ability to perform at higher levels. How does that impact performance? Well, emotional states, specifically when you're under stress or pressure, can either enhance or detract from an individual's effectiveness. It isn't always that stress or pressure is a bad thing. It may help you perform at a higher level, but obviously you don't want to stay under stress or pressure for long periods of time, because there is a point of diminishing returns when it's just going to become negative and there's just going to be cost after that point. It isn't going to add to anything. It is going to add value. So, for example, a person who habitually reacts to stress with anxiety may develop counterproductive habits that diminish their performance and that of their team, especially if they're a leader. Alternatively, someone who responds to stress with calm resilience can maintain productive habits even in challenging circumstances. So there you can see how it isn't the stress and the pressure that necessarily is a negative thing. It's how you respond to it. How do you navigate those emotions and that emotional environment that you're living in? So if we think about targeting emotional drivers by measuring and tracking our emotional state, the habit story assessment allows us to develop emotional intelligence strategies to manage those responses. And there's a lot of wonderful work that can be done if we can understand what our emotional state is. It really points us toward specific areas that we can grow in and develop to help us get our emotional state in a place where it's going to serve us well instead of be draining our energy. So that gives you a sense of where we're headed with the habit story assessment and how profoundly impactful it can be. We want to turn things into an opportunity for productive action instead of retreating, instead of going backwards. I always like to provide some practical ideas or thoughts or even recommendations on what do you do with this information. So I want to focus specifically on the heart of the habit story assessment, which is the measure of productive and counterproductive habits. If we can truly understand the nature of productive and counterproductive habits, we have the key to unlock the opportunity for making lasting transformation. And I like to use the term transformation instead of change, because change to me could be temporary. We might change for a while and then change back, slip back into old habits. You ever heard that before? So we want to think transformation here. Now, remember we talked about what productive habits are, aligning with your personal values, goals, your desired outcomes, things like daily goal setting, practicing empathy in interactions, maintaining consistency in follow-up and communication. And those habits, as we know, will enhance our performance, but they also contribute to higher levels of personal satisfaction and achievement. And then again, on the other side, the counterproductive habits, these are actions that derail our progress. They reduce our performance, or they lead to negative emotional states. Common examples can include things like procrastination, reactive anger, or avoidance of difficult tasks. And the specific counterproductive habits I'll talk about in a future episode, and we'll go deeper into all of those. There are quite a few of them, so I want to keep it at a high level today, and then down the road we'll go deeper into all of these. But if we can understand our counterproductive habits, what our measures are of those counterproductive habits, and how they're impacting us, and how they can create stress, how they can damage relationships, and how they can lead to feelings of inadequacy or frustration. Counterproductive habits are there for a reason. At some point in the past, they have provided some type of reward. Now, that reward may not be leading to a good long-term outcome, but there has been some type of reward, and that's why it's a habit. If you do something and it doesn't reward you, you're probably not going to do it again. But it doesn't mean that if something rewards you, that it's actually good for you in the long term and good for your personal and professional success in the long term. So when we think about the impact of things, a productive habit acts as an accelerator for success, while a counterproductive habit serves as a barrier. I think that's a really simple but easy way to understand it. Is it accelerating you to success, or is it holding you back? The habit story assessment really shines a light on the patterns, on these habits, which provides us with clear insight into which of those habits are serving us well and which need to be addressed. Now, this clarity is crucial for crafting a personalized development plan that will target specific areas for improvement. I've seen so many books. I've heard so many podcasts. I've read so many articles about habits and habit formation, and hey, some of those are really good. I'm not saying those are not good. But how do you take those actions and put those practices into place and be highly effective if you don't have very good measures to ensure that you're focused in the right areas, focused in the right pathway to transformation? That's my thought process here. So let's talk about creating a plan for success, using the insights that we can get from this habit story assessment. Well, it doesn't stop at highlighting the habits and the emotional triggers. what it does, it provides actionable data and insights that help us build a concrete plan for behavior change and for habit formation by intelligent design. If we leave our habits up to the environment around us, so call it evolution, if you will, that's messy and chaotic. But we can literally intelligently design a pathway that will help us maximize our productive habits while at the same time minimizing counterproductive habits. How do we do that? First, it's an awareness of the cues. What are the triggers that put us into one of those habits? Once we recognize our emotional triggers, we can develop strategies to either avoid these triggers or change our response when the trigger occurs. And this directly relates to self-awareness in emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is one of the 5 primary categories of emotional intelligence. And these things are all tied together. You probably know by now that I do deep work in emotional intelligence and neuroscience. And the ability to really understand what are the skills of emotional intelligence, what is the impact of emotional intelligence skills in a person's life, and how do we grow those? How do we develop those? These are all tied together. So those skills, even the assessments for emotional intelligence, which we call EQ assessments or emotional quotient, are directly connected to what we see in the habit story. So the habit story will identify our productive and counterproductive habits, our response patterns, and our emotional state. And an EQ assessment that is highly validated, like the one I use from 6 Seconds, can show us the specific emotional intelligence skills and which of those need to be enhanced and developed to help us in our habit transformation. So being aware of what those triggers are is the first step. Now, refining the prediction. Remember, the second step in the cycle is predict, like predict what's going to happen, what it's going to feel like, what the outcome is going to be. If we can become aware of what's going on in that prediction step, what we expect to gain from acting on a habit, we can actually evaluate whether our prediction is accurate and beneficial. If it's not, then we're operating on a false premise. This creates space for more rational decision making. Here's another step we can take. We can be deliberate with our actions. Remember, ACT is the third of the 4 steps in that cycle of habit formation and habit reinforcement. The assessment's insight will help us replace counterproductive habits with more constructive alternatives. For example, we might replace something like blame fixing with taking personal ownership. So when something goes wrong, when things don't work out the way we hope they will, instead of blaming somebody else, what if we were to take ownership, find a solution, move forward, collaborate? So when we think about deliberate actions, that is a deliberate and intentional choice. But if we don't have the awareness that comes before that, we can't take more intentional and deliberate choices. And the last part of that cycle is the reinforcement part. Now, we know that it's going to be either reinforcement or trying to extinguish or get rid of that habit. The habit story model really emphasizes the importance of reinforcing those productive habits through consistent practice, through emotional rewards, and ensuring that we are focused on habits They're going to be productive habits and are going to provide a positive outcome, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. So, as we kind of bring this together, the habit story assessment has proven invaluable in my consulting and coaching work. And I've only had it for a year. I cannot wait to see what happens in the years to come. This has been profoundly impactful for so many people already. And I'm just excited to see how many people I can help with this going forward. It offers a clear framework for understanding the often subconscious patterns or habits of behavior that shape somebody's success. By breaking down these habits into their component parts and understanding what those are, cue, predict, act, reinforce, the assessment actually provides actionable insights into how habits are formed, how they're maintained. People not only become aware of their productive and counterproductive habits, but they gain the tools necessary to make the changes in their behaviors and their habits and ultimately enhance their performance and satisfaction. You just don't get that anywhere else. I mean, habits are such a mishmash of confused information. And yes, there are some good books and some good people out there are doing work in the area of habits and habit formation and habit transformation. But there is so much noise out there. Why don't we focus on a highly validated assessment that gives us good data so we can make the best decisions possible? And that's what the habit story assessment is. Through this process, this habit story model becomes a roadmap for creating lasting and meaningful change, both in our personal and our professional lives. I cannot wait to see what the future brings for the people that have gained this insight and can now move forward knowing how to create the best habit environment for themselves. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you have any questions about this week's episode, or maybe a suggestion for future episodes you'd like us to explore, please contact us through our website at eqfit.org. For more information and inspiration, connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube at EQFit.